Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Clara Bennett. She had learned to disappear before anyone could decide she was in the way. In the Romano mansion, disappearing was not just a skill. It was survival. The marble floors shone like frozen moonlight beneath the chandeliers. Crystal glasses lined the silver trays. Violin music floated through the grand hall, soft and expensive, wrapping itself around laughter from people who had never once wondered who polished the glass they drank from. Clara Bennett moved between them with her head slightly lowered, one hand steady beneath a tray of red wine, the other pressed close to her waist where an old ache had begun to return. She was 43, though exhaustion sometimes made her look older under the warm gold lights. Her black uniform was spotless. Her shoes were worn thin. Her face carried the calm expression of a woman who had been insulted so many times that reacting had become too costly. To the guests, she was not Clara. She was Maid. Girl. Hey you. A moving shadow in a room full of people who believed money made them taller. At the far end of the hall sat Salvatore Romano, 60 years old, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and silent in a black suit that seemed cut from midnight itself. He had not spoken much all evening. Men came to his table with lowered voices. Women smiled carefully when they passed him. Even the music seemed softer near his chair. Everyone knew who he was. A man who had ruled the city's underground for 3 decades. A man whose name could open locked doors or close entire businesses. A man feared by politicians, bankers, judges, and men who carried guns under tailored jackets. But tonight, Salvatore was not watching his enemies. He was watching Clara. Not because she was loud. Not because she was beautiful in the way the room understood beauty, but because she kept apologizing for pain that other people caused. Careful, a woman snapped as Clara passed behind her chair. I'm sorry, ma'am, Clara whispered, though she had not touched her. A man laughed under his breath. They train them to say that, don't they? Clara's fingers tightened around the tray. Just for a second. Then she moved on. That was when Vivian Moretti turned from her circle of friends, diamonds flashing at her throat. A champagne glass dangling lazily between 2 fingers. Vivian had been waiting for a moment. Maybe she was bored. Maybe cruelty was the only language she spoke fluently. Or maybe she simply saw Clara's quietness and mistook it for permission. As Clara stepped beside her to offer wine, Vivian shifted her elbow sharply. The tray tilted. One glass fell. Then another. Red wine splashed across the white marble, across the hem of Vivian's silver dress, across Clara's sleeve like a wound opening in public. The music seemed to thin. Vivian gasped loudly, not from shock, but performance. Oh my God, she said, raising her voice so the room could hear. Do you people ever learn how to serve properly? A few guests turned. Someone chuckled. Clara froze, still holding the half-empty tray. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. You're sorry. Vivian cut in. This dress costs more than your entire year's salary. The laughter grew warmer now, encouraged by power. Clara lowered herself to pick up the broken glass, but her hand trembled. A thin line of red wine ran down her wrist. She kept her eyes on the floor. Then Vivian leaned closer, smiling with cold satisfaction. Maybe you should get on your knees and clean it before you ruin anything else. The room went still for half a breath. Not because they were ashamed, because they wanted to see whether Clara would obey. Across the hall, Salvatore Romano's hand stopped on the head of his silver cane. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time that night, the most dangerous man in the room looked truly angry. Clara Bennett did not get on her knees because she was weak. She got on her knees because life had taught her that pride did not pay rent, that dignity was often something poor people had to hide carefully in their pockets, like the last few dollars before payday. Her fingers moved toward the broken glass. Slowly, carefully, the sharp pieces glittered under the chandelier light, scattered across the marble, like tiny fragments of a life she had spent trying to keep together. Look at her, someone whispered behind a champagne flute. She's actually doing it. Another guest laughed. Clara heard them. Of course she heard them. Women like her always heard everything. The insult behind the smile. The disgust tucked inside polite voices. The way rich people could say help and make it sound like less than human. But Clara had learned not to answer. 21 years of service had trained her face into stillness. She had cleaned penthouses after parties where men left cash on tables, but never looked her in the eye. She had washed silk sheets in houses where children were taught 3 languages, but never taught kindness. She had been blamed for missing jewelry, cold coffee, rainy weather, bad moods, and marriages falling apart. And every time, Clara had swallowed the words she wanted to say. Because at home, a 12-year-old girl named Maya needed dinner. Maya was Clara's niece, though Clara loved her like a daughter. After Clara's younger sister passed away, Maya had arrived at her door with 1 backpack, 2 dolls, and eyes too old for a child. Since then, Clara had worked whatever hours she could find. Morning shifts in hotel laundry, afternoon cleaning jobs, night events at mansions where people spent more on flowers than Clara spent on groceries in a month. So yes, Clara bent down. Not for Vivian Moretti. Not for the laughing guests. For Maya's school shoes. For the overdue light bill. For the small apartment where the heater clicked like an old heart in winter. She picked up the first piece of glass. A sting flashed across her fingertip. A small bead of blood appeared. Clara quickly curled her hand, trying to hide it before anyone noticed. She knew what would happen if they saw blood on the floor. More disgust. More accusations. Another reminder that even her pain was considered an inconvenience. But Salvatore Romano saw it. From across the room, he saw everything. The way Clara pressed her injured finger into her palm. The way she kept her eyes down. The way her shoulders tightened when Vivian stepped closer. Vivian tilted her head, enjoying the attention. "Don't smear it," she said coldly. "That floor probably costs more than your apartment." The laughter came again. This time, Clara's breath caught. Only for a second, but Salvatore heard it. That tiny break in her breathing moved through him more sharply than any insult spoken aloud. Because it was not the sound of fear. It was the sound of someone who had been abandoned so many times that humiliation had become familiar. He leaned toward his old consigliere, Matteo Russo, who stood beside his chair. "Who is she?" Salvatore asked quietly. Matteo followed his gaze. "Temporary staff. Clara Bennett. Hired through the agency." "How long has she worked events here?" 6 months, maybe more." Salvatore's eyes remained fixed on Clara. "And nobody knows her name?" Matteo hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. On the marble floor, Clara reached for another shard. Vivian's heel came down beside her hand. Not on it. Close enough to make her flinch. The room smiled. And Salvatore Romano's face went completely still. A dangerous kind of still. The kind that made old men stop talking and young men step back. He placed both hands on the silver head of his cane. Then, for the first time that night, he rose from his chair. The music continued for 2 more seconds. Then it died, and Clara, still kneeling beside the broken glass, felt the whole room change before she even looked up. When Salvatore Romano stood, nobody understood yet what had changed. They only felt it. A pressure moved through the grand hall, quiet and heavy, like a storm pressing its hand against the windows. The violinist lowered his bow. The waiters near the kitchen doors stopped breathing. Even the men in dark suits along the walls turned their eyes toward their boss. But Vivian Moretti did not notice. Cruelty had made her careless. She was still staring down at Clara, as if the woman on the floor were a stain that had learned how to apologize. "Well," Vivian said, lifting the edge of her ruined silver dress. "Are you going to just sit there, or are you going to fix what you did?" Clara swallowed. Her knees ached against the marble. One hand held the broken glass. The other was curled tightly around her. Bleeding finger, hidden against her black skirt. She could feel dozens of eyes on her back, not one of them kind enough to help. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Moretti," Clara whispered. "I'll pay for the cleaning." That made Vivian laugh. A bright, sharp sound. "You'll pay?" she repeated, turning toward the guests. "Did everyone hear that?" "She thinks she can pay." A man near the champagne tower covered his mouth, pretending not to laugh. Another shook his head with lazy amusement. A younger woman lifted her phone slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough to record. Clara saw the phone. Something inside her tightened. Not again. She had been recorded before. Years ago, in another mansion, when a drunk guest spilled soup on himself and blamed her. The video had been posted online with laughing emojis. For 3 weeks, strangers had called the agency asking for the clumsy maid. She had lost 2 jobs from that one lie. Now here it was again. A room full of people turning her humiliation into entertainment. Clara forced herself to stand, but Vivian stepped closer, blocking her path. "No," Vivian said. You don't walk away yet. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. Clara lifted her eyes. Only halfway. Vivian smiled. There was victory in that smile. Not because of the dress. Not because of the wine. Because she had made another human being shrink in public, and everyone had allowed it. I want an apology, Vivian said. A real one. Clara's voice was barely audible. I am sorry. Louder. The word cracked across the marble. Clara's throat moved. She looked toward the kitchen doors. The event manager stood there, pale and nervous, but he did nothing. The other staff looked away because they knew the rule. Rich guests could be cruel. Staff had to survive it. I'm sorry, Clara said louder. For what? The question was a trap. Everyone knew it. Clara knew it too. She could say the truth, that Vivian had moved her elbow on purpose, that the spill was not Clara's fault, that the room had watched a lie become a performance. But truth had never protected Clara Bennett. Not when landlords raised rent. Not when employers withheld wages. Not when men spoke to her like her silence belonged to them. So she lowered her head. For being careless, she said. A quiet murmur moved through the guests. Satisfied. Hungry. Vivian leaned back as if accepting tribute. There, she said. Was that so difficult? Across the room, Salvatore Romano took his first step forward. The sound of his cane touching marble was soft. Tap. But it cut through every whisper. Tap. Another step. Clara did not look at him. She was too busy gathering what remained of herself from the floor. But Salvatore saw the way she folded inward after those words. For being careless. He had heard men lie before. He had heard traders beg, bankers flatter, politicians swear loyalty with poison behind their teeth. But this was different. This was a woman confessing to a crime committed against her because life had taught her no one would believe the truth. And for reasons he could not yet explain, it made something old and buried inside him burn. Vivian finally noticed him approaching. Her smile softened into something polished and fake. Mr. Romano, she said lightly, I'm so sorry for the scene. Some people simply don't know how to behave around elegance. Salvatore stopped beside Clara. He did not look at Vivian. He looked down at the woman standing with her injured hand hidden in her skirt, her shoulders stiff, her eyes trained on the floor like the marble had more mercy than the people around her. Then his voice entered the silence, low and calm. Show me your hand. Clara froze. The room did too. Clara did not move. For a moment, she thought she had misunderstood him. Show me your hand. The words were not loud, but they seemed to reach every corner of the grand hall. The guests who had been laughing a minute earlier now stood perfectly still, champagne glasses suspended near their lips, smiles fading into uncertainty. Vivian Moretti blinked. Mr. Romano, she said with a nervous little laugh. Really, there's no need. It's just a bit of spilled wine. These things happen with temporary staff. Salvatore did not look at her. That was the first humiliation Vivian felt. Not being answered. His eyes remained on Clara. Your hand, he repeated, softer this time. Clara's fingers tightened inside the fold of her skirt. The cut was small, but the shame around it was not. She had spent her whole life hiding injuries before they became someone else's complaint. Hide the swollen wrist. Hide the tired eyes. Hide the limp after 12 hours on her feet. Hide the hunger. Hide the fear. Because in houses like this, pain from people like Clara was treated like noise. Something to remove, not something to comfort. I'm fine, sir, she whispered. Salvatore's face did not change, but something in his eyes did. A shadow passed through them. Not anger at her. Anger for her. He lowered his voice until only the nearest guests could hear clearly, though somehow the entire room listened. People who are fine do not hide blood. Clara's breath caught. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she opened her hand. A thin red line crossed her fingertip where the glass had cut her. A tiny wound. Nothing dramatic. Nothing worth a headline. But the way she had hidden it told Salvatore more than the blood itself. He had seen men, with broken pride, scream for mercy. Clara Bennett had been cut in front of a room full of people and apologized for staining the floor. That was when Salvatore noticed the other marks. A faded bruise near her wrist, half covered by her sleeve. A stiffness in her shoulder. The careful way she kept her body turned away from Vivian, as if expecting another strike from the air itself. His jaw tightened. Who stepped near her hand? He asked. No one answered. The question drifted through the hall like smoke. Vivian's smile returned, smaller now. Mr. Romano, I'm sure you're not suggesting. I asked a question. For words. That was all. But the temperature in the room seemed to drop. One of the younger guests looked down. Another shifted his weight. The woman with the phone lowered it slowly, suddenly aware that recording cruelty was not the same as being innocent. Salvatore turned his head at last. His eyes settled on Vivian. "You were close enough," he said. Vivian's face hardened. "She dropped wine on me. She was pushed." A ripple moved through the guests. Vivian laughed again, but this time it cracked at the edges. "That is ridiculous. Why would I push a maid?" The silence after that sentence was worse than any accusation. A maid. Not Clara. Not a woman. Not someone's aunt. Someone's provider. Someone who had worked all night without sitting down. Just a maid. Salvatore looked back at Clara. "What is your name?" She seemed startled by the question. "Clara, sir." "Full name?" "Clara Bennett." He nodded once, as if receiving something sacred. Then he turned toward the event manager, standing frozen near the kitchen doors. "Bring the first aid kit." The manager jolted. "Yes, Mr. Romano." "And call the head of security." Vivian's eyes widened. "Security?" she repeated. "For a broken glass?" Salvatore took one step closer to her. Not threatening. Not theatrical. Just close enough that her confidence began to unravel. "No," he said. "For the truth." The room went silent again. Clara stood beside him, still holding her injured hand in the air, not knowing what to do with the unfamiliar feeling rising in her chest. It was not safety. Not yet. But it was the first time in years that someone powerful had seen her pain and decided it mattered. And that almost broke her more than the cruelty had. The first aid kit arrived in the hands of the event manager, but he did not know who to give it to. For years, men like him had been trained to protect the comfort of guests, not the wounds of staff. So he stood there, pale and uncertain, holding the small white box like it had suddenly become heavier than silver. Salvatore reached out and took it from him. A faint murmur passed through the room. The 60-year-old Mafia boss, the man whose name made grown men lower their voices, opened the first aid kit himself. Clara stared at him. "Sir, you don't have to. I know what I have to do," Salvatore said. Not sharply, but with the kind of finality that ended arguments. He took a clean cloth, dampened it with antiseptic, and held out his hand. Clara hesitated. Everything in her body resisted the gesture. Not because she feared him exactly, though everyone feared Salvatore Romano, but because tenderness from powerful people had always come with a price. A favor expected later. A trap hidden beneath kindness. A reminder that even help could become debt. Salvatore seemed to understand. He did not grab her hand. He waited. That small patience did what shouting could not. Slowly, Clara placed her injured hand in his. The room watched as he cleaned the cut with surprising care. His large hands, marked with age and old scars, held her fingers as if the smallest wound deserved full attention. Not pity, not performance. Attention. Vivian's face twisted with embarrassment. "This is absurd," she muttered. "You're making a spectacle out of nothing." Salvatore continued wrapping the bandage around Clara's finger. "No," he said. "You made the spectacle. I am only making everyone look at it." The words landed like a door closing. Clara lowered her eyes, but not fast enough to hide the tears gathering there. Salvatore noticed. He had seen fear in many forms. Men begging behind locked doors. Businessmen sweating through $1,000 shirts. Politicians smiling while their hands shook. But this was different. Clara was not afraid of punishment. She was afraid of being defended. As if protection itself was unfamiliar. As if she did not know where to stand when someone chose her side. He finished tying the bandage, then looked at her wrist again. The faded bruise was visible now, no longer hidden by the sleeve that had slipped back. His voice softened. "Has this happened before?" Clara's lips parted, but no sound came out. Behind her, the guests waited in that selfish way people wait when someone else's pain becomes interesting. Salvatore saw that too. His expression hardened. "Not for them," he said quietly. "For me." Clara swallowed. "A lot of things happen to women in uniforms, sir," she whispered. "Most people don't notice." There it was. Not an accusation. Something worse. A fact. Salvatore's eyes moved across the room, over the diamonds, the tailored suits, the polished smiles now cracking at the edges. All these people who built their lives on being seen had somehow failed to see the woman standing directly in front of them. Then he looked back at Clara, and when they noticed, he asked, "Did anyone ever protect you?" The question was gentle. That made it unbearable. Clara tried to answer like a worker. Professionally. calmly, with dignity intact. But the truth rose faster than her pride could stop it. Her eyes filled. Her mouth trembled once. "No, sir," she said. 2 words. Small enough to disappear. Heavy enough to silence a mansion. Even Vivian stopped moving. Even the guests who had laughed looked down, because there was no graceful way to stand near that kind of truth. No expensive dress, no family name, no polished accent could cover what they had just witnessed. Salvatore Romano stepped back half a pace and leaned both hands on his silver cane. For a moment, he looked older than 60. Not weak, burdened, as if Clara's answer had reached some locked room inside him and opened a door he had spent years keeping shut. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the hall. "Then tonight," he said, "that ends." Clara looked up. Vivian's face went pale, and every person in the room understood that the evening had stopped being a party. It had become a judgment. "Then tonight," Salvatore said, "that ends." No one moved. The chandelier light trembled faintly above them, catching the diamonds at Vivian Moretti's throat, the red wine on the marble, the small white bandage around Clara Bennett's finger. Everything in the room looked expensive, except the truth. The truth looked simple. A woman had been hurt, a room had laughed, and now the one man they all feared had decided to remember what they wanted forgotten. Vivian forced a smile. "Mr. Romano," she said carefully, "I respect you deeply, but surely you're not going to ruin an evening over a misunderstanding." Salvatore turned his head. "A misunderstanding?" His voice was almost gentle. That made it worse. Vivian straightened, clutching what remained of her pride. "Yes." She dropped the tray. "I reacted. Perhaps I was harsh, but people are too sensitive these days. We can all apologize and move on." Clara looked down. That sentence had followed her all her life. Move on. After insults, after unpaid wages, after doors closed in her face, after people broke something inside her and asked why she was still holding the pieces. Move on, they always said, because moving on was easier than making the guilty stand. Still, Salvatore did not answer Vivian. He looked toward the balcony above the hall, where 2 security guards stood near the carved railing. "Luca," he called. A tall man in a black suit stepped forward. "Yes, boss." "Show the room." A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. Vivian blinked. "Show the room what?" Luca did not speak. He took a small remote from his jacket and pointed it toward the far wall. A hidden screen lowered slowly over the oil painting behind the grand piano. The soft mechanical hum sounded louder than thunder. Clara lifted her eyes. On the screen appeared the security footage from 10 minutes earlier. The grand hall from above. The guests laughing. Clara moving carefully through the room with the tray. Vivian turning. Vivian looking first at Clara, then at her friends. And then Vivian's elbow. Sharp. Deliberate. A clean little movement. Enough to tilt the tray. Enough to make the wine fall. Enough to turn an innocent woman into entertainment. The room held its breath. The video continued. Clara apologizing. Vivian stepping near her hand. The guests laughing. The young woman lifting her phone to record. The event manager standing by the kitchen doors, watching and doing nothing. Salvatore let the footage play without a word. That was the punishment. Not shouting. Not threats. Just the unbearable sight of people seeing themselves exactly as they were. Vivian's face lost color. "That angle is misleading," she said quickly. "I didn't mean," Salvatore raised one hand. She stopped. Not because he touched her. Because everyone knew that when Salvatore Romano raised his hand, powerful men had learned to be silent. He looked around the hall slowly. "At my table tonight," he said, "there are bankers, judges, owners, donors, people who speak every day about class, honor, family, tradition." His eyes moved over them one by one. And yet one woman in a black uniform showed more grace on her knees than all of you showed standing. Nobody breathed. Clara felt her throat tighten. She wanted to disappear again. That old instinct rose in her like a reflex. Step back. Eyes down. Let it pass. Survive the moment. But Salvatore shifted slightly, placing himself not in front of her, but beside her. Not hiding her. Standing with her. It was such a small difference. It changed everything. He looked at Vivian. "You will apologize to Clara Bennett." Vivian's lips parted. "To her face," Salvatore added. Vivian glanced around, searching for support. No one met her eyes. The same people who had laughed with her now abandoned her with the elegance of cowards. Vivian swallowed. "I'm sorry." Salvatore's expression did not move. For what? The same trap Vivian had set for Clara now returned to her, clean and merciless. Vivian's eyes shone with humiliation. For pushing you, she said, voice thin. For lying. For making you apologize when you did nothing wrong. Clara stared at her. Not with triumph. With disbelief. Because for the first time in her life, the truth had not arrived too late. Salvatore turned to the event manager. You watched. The man flinched. Sir, I didn't know what to, you knew. The words landed hard. You knew the difference between right and wrong. You chose comfort. The manager lowered his head. Salvatore looked back at the room. Anyone who laughed, recorded, or stayed silent will leave my house before Clara takes another step. A deep silence followed. Then chairs began to move. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Diamonds, silk, polished shoes, powerful names. All of them walking toward the exits under the eyes of the woman they had tried to make small. Clara stood still, bandaged hand pressed against her chest. The grand hall emptied around her. And when the last guest disappeared through the doors, the mansion finally became quiet enough for dignity to breathe. The grand hall had never felt so large. Minutes ago, it had been crowded with laughter, perfume, music, and the polished arrogance of people who believed the world existed to move out of their way. Now, only silence remained. A few staff members stood near the kitchen doors, frozen between fear and disbelief. The violinist held his instrument against his chest, unsure whether to leave or play. The red wine still stained the marble floor, dark and spreading, but no one dared step over it. Clara Bennett stood in the center of the room with her bandaged finger pressed gently against her palm. For the first time all night, no one was telling her to clean. No one was telling her to apologize. No one was calling her girl. Salvatore Romano turned toward Luca, his head of security. Make a list, he said. Luca nodded. Of the guests, sir? Of everyone who laughed. The words did not need to be loud. They carried. From the hallway outside came the faint sound of expensive heels stopping. A few guests who had not fully reached the exit heard him clearly. So did Vivian Moretti, who stood near the doorway with her husband, her face pale beneath her makeup. Her husband, Carlo Moretti, stepped forward, trying to recover what remained of their public dignity. Salvatore, he said carefully, we have known each other a long time. Surely this does not need to affect business. Salvatore looked at him, not with rage, with disappointment. That was worse. You watched your wife humiliate a woman in my home. Carlo swallowed. I thought it was a misunderstanding. No, Salvatore said. You thought she was safe to humiliate. The sentence moved through the room like cold air. Carlo's mouth opened, then closed. Salvatore turned to Matteo Russo, who had remained beside his chair, silent and grim. Cancel the Moretti agreement. Carlo stiffened. You can't be serious. I am rarely more serious than when I discover a man's character before signing his name. Vivian let out a small sound, half gasp, half protest. But no one comforted her. The same room that had enjoyed Clara's shame now watched Vivian's fall with frightened attention. The difference was sharp enough to cut. When Clara had been humiliated, they had laughed. When Vivian was exposed, they became nervous. That was how power worked. Salvatore knew it. And tonight, he used it differently. He faced the staff next. The kitchen workers lowered their eyes, expecting blame. The servers stood stiff in their black uniforms. The event manager looked like he wanted the marble floor to open beneath him. Salvatore's gaze moved from one face to another. This house has rules, he said. But from tonight, there is one above all others. He paused. No employee in my home will ever be asked to trade their dignity for a paycheck. The words settled slowly. Some of the staff looked up. Not fully, just enough to believe they had heard correctly. Salvatore pointed his cane toward the event manager. You are dismissed. The man's face collapsed. Mr. Romano, please. I have a family. So does Clara Bennett. The room went still again. There it was. The truth so many people forgot when looking at uniforms. A maid had a family, a waitress had bills, a cleaner had dreams, a quiet woman had a whole life outside the room, where others decided she was nothing. The event manager lowered his head and stepped back. Salvatore then turned to Clara. For the first time, his voice lost its iron edge. Miss Bennett. That name, Miss Bennett, almost broke her. Not Clara. Not Maid. Not staff. Miss Bennett. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of the room that had already taken enough from her. Yes, sir. You will not clean this floor. Clara stared at him. Her instinct was immediate. But it's my job. No, Salvatore said. Your job is service, not humiliation. He looked toward the younger staff member standing by the wine table. Bring someone from maintenance. The young man nodded quickly and disappeared. Clara's chest rose with an unsteady breath. She had spent so many years being useful that standing still felt almost like rebellion. Her hands did not know what to do without work in them. Salvatore noticed. Sit, he said, gesturing to the nearest chair. Clara shook her head at once. I can't sit there, sir. That's for guests. Salvatore's eyes softened. You were the only person in this room who behaved like one. No one spoke. Clara looked at the chair as if it belonged to another world. Gold-framed, velvet-covered, placed beneath a chandelier brighter than any light in her apartment. Slowly, she sat. Not because she was tired, though she was. Because someone had finally made room for her. And as Clara Bennett sat in the chair meant for the powerful, every remaining person in the mansion understood that justice had not arrived with shouting. It had arrived quietly, wearing a black suit, holding a silver cane, and standing beside the woman nobody had protected before. Clara Bennett sat beneath the chandelier with her hands folded in her lap, and for the first time and longer than she could remember, no one was rushing her. No bell ringing from a kitchen. No sharp voice asking why she was standing still. No manager whispering, "Just apologize," so the guests calmed down. Only silence. But this silence was different from the silence that had followed Vivian's cruelty. That earlier silence had been cowardly, full of people waiting to see how far humiliation could go before it became uncomfortable. This silence had weight. It had shame in it, and something almost holy. Salvatore Romano stood a few feet away, one hand resting on the silver head of his cane. The room had emptied of most guests, but not of witnesses. The staff remained. Security remained. A few family associates remained near the pillars, their expressions unreadable, but their eyes lowered. They had all heard him. No employee in my home will ever be asked to trade their dignity for a paycheck. Clara kept repeating the sentence in her mind, like she was afraid it would disappear. Her dignity, not her usefulness, not her obedience, not her ability to keep quiet. Her dignity. A young maid named Rosa stepped forward from near the kitchen doors, her eyes wet. She could not have been more than 22. Clara had seen her working events for 3 months, always fast, always nervous, always apologizing before anyone accused her of anything. Rosa looked at Salvatore, then at Clara. "Miss Bennett," she said softly, "would you like some water?" Miss Bennett. Again, Clara's breath caught. It was such a small thing, a name with respect attached to it. But small things could become miracles when a person had gone years without them. "Yes," Clara whispered. "Thank you." Rosa hurried to bring a glass. As Clara accepted it, she saw the other staff watching. Not with pity, not with embarrassment, with something closer to recognition. As if Clara's humiliation had opened a door they had all been standing behind in silence. Salvatore saw it too. He turned toward the staff. "Each of you will give your full name to Matteo before you leave." "Tonight," he said. The staff stiffened, afraid. Salvatore noticed and raised one hand slightly. Not for punishment. Their shoulders eased, but only a little. For protection, he continued. "From now on, every person who works in this house will be known by name. Not by uniform, not by position, not by whatever a guest feels entitled to call you." Matteo Russo pulled out a small notebook, his face solemn. Salvatore looked toward Clara. "Miss Bennett will be the first." Clara nearly stood from the chair out of habit, but Salvatore shook his head once. "You may remain seated." That almost undid her. Because respect was not only in grand speeches. Sometimes it was in not being forced to rise when your knees hurt. Sometimes it was in being allowed to rest without earning permission through suffering. Matteo approached carefully. "Full name, ma'am." Clara swallowed. "Clara Louise Bennett." "Emergency contact?" "My niece," she said. "Maya Bennett." "How old is Maya?" 12. Salvatore's eyes shifted. A child. Of course there was a child. There was always someone waiting at home for people the world treated as disposable. He looked at Clara's worn shoes, the carefully mended sleeve of her uniform, the way she still held the water glass with both hands, as if afraid someone might take it from her. "What time does your shift end?" he asked. Clara answered automatically. "Whenever the event is cleared, sir." "The event is over." She looked up. "The agency said I'm scheduled until 2. Then the agency will be paid until 2, Salvatore said. You will go home now. Clara's first response was fear. It moved across her face before she could hide it. If I leave early, they may not call me again. Salvatore's gaze hardened, but not at her. They will. She shook her head gently, exhausted by promises that belonged to other people. With respect, sir, agencies don't protect women like me. Salvatore was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Matteo. By the agency. The room froze. Clara blinked. Sir. Matteo nodded as if Salvatore had asked him to order coffee. I'll make the calls tonight. Salvatore looked back at Clara. Then tomorrow, agencies will. No one laughed. Now, no one dared mistake his calmness for softness. Clara stared at him, and the tears she had held back all evening finally slipped down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly, ashamed of crying in a room where she had already been seen too much. But Salvatore's voice softened. Do not apologize for tears you earned honestly. Clara's hand stopped midway to her face. Behind her, Rosa began to cry too. Then one of the kitchen workers looked away, pressing his lips together. Even Luca, the head of security, lowered his eyes. Because justice had done something strange tonight. It had not only punished the cruel, it had given the unseen permission to believe they mattered. Salvatore stepped back, giving Clara space, not crowding her grief with his power. Then he spoke clearly enough for the room to remember. Her name is Clara Louise Bennett. She is to be treated as a guest in this house until she chooses otherwise. The words settled over the marble, over the broken glass, over the red wine stain slowly being cleaned by someone who was paid to clean floors, not shame. Clara sat still beneath the chandelier. For once, not invisible. For once, not alone. And for once, the room did not look through her. It looked at her. The mansion doors opened to the night. Cold air moved through the grand entrance, carrying away the last traces of perfume, wine, and shame. Outside, black cars waited along the curved driveway beneath the yellow glow of iron lamps. One by one, the remaining guests disappeared into them without saying goodbye. No one asked for their coats loudly now. No one laughed. No one looked back at Clara Bennett. Maybe because they were embarrassed. Maybe because they finally understood that being seen could feel like judgment when your own reflection was ugly. Clara stood near the front steps with her small purse held against her chest. Rosa had helped her collect her coat from the staff room. Matteo had written down her information. Luca had quietly arranged a car to take her home. Everything had happened so quickly that Clara still felt as if she were walking through someone else's life. Miss Bennett. She turned. Salvatore Romano stood behind her, his silver cane resting against the marble floor. Without the crowd around him, he looked less like a legend and more like an old man carrying too many ghosts. The hard lines of his face remained, but his eyes had changed. They were quieter now, almost tired. Your car is ready, he said. Clara looked past him at the sleek black vehicle waiting near the steps. That's not necessary, sir. I can take the bus. At this hour? I always do. The answer came too naturally. That was what hurt. Salvatore studied her for a moment. And Maya waits up for you. Clara's expression softened at the name. Sometimes, she admitted. She tries not to. But she worries. She should not have to worry tonight. Clara looked down at her bandaged finger. You've already done more than enough. Salvatore was silent. Then he stepped closer, slowly, giving her every chance not to feel trapped. Clara, he said, and this time he used only her first name, not to diminish her, but to speak gently. Enough is what people say when they do not want responsibility to continue past the moment. She lifted her eyes. He looked toward the empty hall behind them. I have spent most of my life being feared, he said. Men obeyed me. Doors opened. Rooms went quiet when I entered. His mouth tightened slightly. But tonight, I watched a room go quiet for the wrong reason. Not respect. Not fear. Cowardice. Clara did not know what to say. Salvatore reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a folded white envelope. She stiffened at once. He saw it and lowered his hand slightly. This is not charity, he said. Clara's voice was careful. Then what is it? Your wages for tonight. Doubled. Paid directly, not through the agency. He paused. And a formal offer. Full-time position, benefits, fixed hours, transportation home after evening events. You may refuse it. Clara stared at the envelope as if it might disappear. For years, work had meant begging for scraps of stability from people who used need as a leash. A proper offer, spoken with respect, felt almost unreal. My niece, she whispered. I have to be home for her. Then your schedule will be built around that. Her lips parted. No one had ever built anything around her life before. They had built rules around their convenience, shifts around their parties, pay around their greed, but never around the small apartment where Maya waited with homework on the kitchen table and worry in her young eyes. Clara pressed one hand to her mouth. The tears came again, quieter this time. Salvatore did not move to touch her. He did not crowd her sorrow. He simply stood there, steady as stone, letting her have the moment without taking ownership of it. After a while, Clara wiped her face. Why? She asked. The question was small, but it carried years. Why see me? Why now? Why tonight, when no one ever had before? Salvatore looked toward the dark driveway. Because my mother cleaned houses, he said quietly. And when I was young, I was ashamed of her tired hands. Clara looked at him. His face remained stern, but his voice had roughened. I spent my life becoming powerful enough that no one could look down on me. Then tonight, I realized power means nothing if you use it only to protect yourself. The night seemed to hold its breath. Clara clutched the envelope to her chest. Thank you, she whispered. Salvatore nodded once. Not accepting worship, only acknowledging truth. Luca opened the car door. Clara walked toward it, then stopped and turned back. Mr. Romano? Yes. My name sounded different tonight, she said softly. When you said it, for the first time all evening, something almost like sadness crossed his face. No, he replied. It sounded the way it always should have. Clara stepped into the car. As it pulled away from the mansion, she looked through the window at the old Mafia boss standing beneath the lamps, silver cane in hand, watching until she was safely gone. And when Clara Bennett arrived home, Maya ran into her arms and asked why she was crying. Clara held the child close and smiled through her tears. Because, she whispered, tonight, someone finally stood beside me. And that night, the world remembered what dignity looks like.